The conference room smelled like the coffee nobody had touched. 47 people in folding chairs, the projector humming behind me, and my brother-in-law standing at the front of the room, holding a stapled packet of papers he hadn't bothered to read. He cleared his throat twice before he could get the words out. That should have told me something. In 21 years of working alongside the man, I had never once seen him nervous about an announcement. He delivered bad news the way other men ordered sandwiches. "Effective Monday," he said, "Cole Whitfield will be assuming the role of Chief Operations Officer." I was sitting in the second row. I remember because my coffee was on the floor next to my left shoe, and I was watching the steam curl up out of the lid, and I remember thinking that I had picked the wrong seat. If I had been in the back, I could have walked out without anyone seeing my face change. Cole was 26 years old. He was my brother-in-law's son. He had graduated from a state school 4 years earlier with a business degree he barely earned, and he had spent the last 18 months shadowing various departments, which mostly meant showing up at 11, leaving at 3, and asking questions that should have been embarrassing to a man with a high school diploma. And he was about to be my boss. I want to back up here, because the way I'm telling it makes me sound like a man who didn't see it coming, and that isn't true. I saw it. I saw it the way you see a leak in the ceiling before the sheetrock falls. I just thought I had more time. My name is Russell Hartigan. I was 51 years old that morning, and I had spent the last 21 years of my life building Harlan Logistics and Freight into what it was. When I started there in 2003, fresh out of the Army with a logistics specialty and a wife who was pregnant with our first daughter, the company had 6 trucks, a single warehouse in Lubbock, Texas, and 1 regional account moving feed and egg equipment across 3 counties. My father-in-law, Earl Harlan, was 62 then. He had founded the company in 1978 with 2 trucks and a handshake, and by the time I came aboard, he was tired, and his back was bad, and his son Wade, my brother-in-law, the man at the front of the room, was a foreman of the yard who couldn't have read a balance sheet if you spotted him the cover page. I built that company. I'm going to say that flat, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I built the Federal Contract Division from nothing. I'm the one who got us our SAM registration in 2007, who pursued our 8A status alternatives, who learned how to write technical proposals and read FAR regulations until my eyes blurred. I'm the one who landed our first GSA schedule award in 2011, who got us on the list for FEMA Emergency Logistics in 2013, who personally walked the bid for the Defense Logistics Agency contract in 2016, the one that put us in trucks running freight to Fort Hood, Fort Bliss, and 3 depots in Oklahoma. By the time I was 48, Harlan Logistics had grown from 6 trucks to 112. We had warehouses in Lubbock, Amarillo, and a satellite operation in El Paso. We were doing $41 million in revenue, and 70% of that revenue came from federal contracts I had personally written, negotiated, and managed. Earl had stepped back to chairman by then. He came in 2 days a week, mostly to drink coffee in the conference room and tell the same Vietnam stories to whoever was new. Wade had been promoted to CEO in 2018, which was a decision I disagreed with privately and supported publicly because Wade was my wife Caroline's older brother, and Caroline had begged me to be patient. "He just needs to feel like the company's still his family," she told me one night, sitting on the edge of our bed with her hair still wet from the shower. "Dad worked his whole life for that company. He needs to see a Harlan running it." I told her I understood. I told her I wasn't doing the work for credit. I was doing it because it needed to be done. And I meant it. I'm not the kind of man who needs a plaque on the wall to know what he's worth. But here's the thing about being patient. Patience only works if the other side is patient back. Cole started shadowing me in the spring of 2023. Wade brought him into my office one Tuesday morning and said the boy needed to learn the operations side, and would I mind walking him through some things. I didn't mind. I taught Cole how a bid package gets assembled. I taught him how to read a delivery schedule. I introduced him to our contracting officers at the agencies, and I sat with him through 3 different post-award debriefs. I gave him real work. I treated him like I would have treated any junior project manager. The problem was that Cole didn't want to learn. He wanted to be told he already knew. He wanted to walk into a room and have people defer to him because his last name was Whitfield, which is what he'd take after his mother, Wade's wife, instead of Harlan. But everyone in the company knew his grandfather was Earl. Cole didn't read the proposals I gave him. He scrolled his phone in meetings. He came back from a site visit at Fort Bliss and told me the procurement officer there, a woman named Patricia, who I'd known for 9 years, was kind of a bitch, no offense. That was the moment I should have understood. I called Wade that afternoon and told him his son needed more time at a lower level before he was ready for anything serious. Wade told me he appreciated the input and would think about it. He didn't think about it. He just stopped sending Cole to me. For the next 8 months, I noticed small things. I'd hear about meetings I should have been in. I'd see emails forwarded to me 3 days after the fact. Wade started having lunch with Cole and 2 of our senior account managers, and nobody invited me, even though I was the director of federal operations and those 2 account managers reported directly to me. And then there was the day in October. I was in my office, going over the Q3 numbers, and our HR manager, a woman named Loretta Banks, who had been with the company 16 years and was the only person in that building besides my wife I would have trusted with my house keys, knocked on my door, came in, and closed it behind her. "Russ," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to never tell anyone I told you." I put down my pen. "Wade had me draft an offer letter yesterday," she said. "It's for Cole, Chief Operations Officer, effective the 1st of the year." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "What's the comp package?" She told me. It was $18,000 more than what I was being paid. I thanked her. I asked her to keep this between us. She nodded and left, and after she was gone, I sat at my desk for a long time without moving. Now, I want you to understand something about me, because if you don't understand this, the rest of the story isn't going to make sense. I am not a vindictive man. I am not the kind of person who keeps a list. My father was a long-haul driver for Yellow Freight for 31 years, and he raised me on 2 things. Do your job and don't make a scene. I have lived my entire adult life by those 2 principles, and they have served me well. But there is a difference between not being vindictive and not being prepared. The next morning, before the sun came up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad, and I made a list. Not a revenge list. An inventory. I wrote down every federal contract Harlan Logistics held. I wrote down the prime contract number, the agency, the contracting officer, the period of performance, and one more thing. The name on the contract. See, here's something most people don't understand about federal contracting. When a small business pursues a federal contract, the government doesn't just want to see a company name. They want to see who the responsible party is. The performance history follows that person. The security clearances follow that person. The CPAR's evaluations, which are the federal government's performance reviews for contractors, those follow that person. When I had built our federal practice from nothing, I had built it on me. My name, my past performance, my security clearance, which was secret level and had been since 2014, my CPAR scores, my personal relationships with 23 different contracting officers at 11 different agencies, 8 of our top 12 federal contracts, representing about $26 million in annual revenue, listed me personally as the key personnel. Removing key personnel from a federal contract is not something a company gets to do unilaterally. It requires written notice to the contracting officer, a substitution plan, and approval. And contracting officers, in my experience, do not approve substitutions of a known performer for an unknown 26-year-old whose only experience is shadowing his uncle. I wrote all of this down. I made 2 copies. I put 1 copy in my safe at home and 1 copy in a manila envelope I sealed with tape and put in my desk drawer at the office, behind a stack of last year's bid logs. Then I went to work and acted like nothing had changed. December came. Christmas at my in-laws' house, which is a thing I will not describe here because describing it would make me angry, and I'm trying to keep this clean. Cole was there, of course, with his fiancée, a girl named Brittany who couldn't stop talking about their honeymoon plans. Wade gave a toast. Earl fell asleep in his recliner before dessert. Caroline squeezed my hand under the table during the toast and didn't look at me, because she knew. I had told her. 2 nights after Loretta told me, I sat my wife down in our kitchen and told her everything. She cried for a long time. She kept saying she was sorry. I told her she had nothing to be sorry for because she didn't. Her brother and her nephew were the ones doing this, not her. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I'm going to think about it," I said. "Russell, don't do anything that's going to—" "I'm going to think about it," I said again. "But Caroline, whatever I decide, I need you with me on it. I'm asking you that one time." She looked at me for a long time, and then she nodded, and then she said something I will never forget as long as I live. She said, "You're my husband first. Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I want to put that down because it is the single most important sentence in this entire story. Without that sentence, I do nothing. Without that sentence, I take the demotion, and I eat it, and I work for a 26-year-old boy until I die at my desk. With that sentence, I had options. So, the morning of the announcement. Cole standing at the front of the room with a packet he hadn't read. Wade not looking at me. 47 people pretending they didn't already know. When the meeting ended, I stood up, gathered my things, and walked back to my office at a normal pace. I did not slam the door. I did not raise my voice. I sat down at my desk and I opened my email and I sent one message. It went to a man named Stephen Whitlow. Stephen had been my counterpart at a competitor, a freight logistics firm based out of Fort Worth called Mercer Lane Logistics. Stephen and I had been on opposite sides of about 11 federal bids over the years. We had become friendly the way 2 professionals do when they keep running into each other in airport hotel bars in Washington. About 4 months earlier, back in August, when I had first started to feel the wind change, Stephen had reached out to me. He was being promoted to president. He wanted to know if I had ever thought about leaving Harlan. I had told him I would let him know. He had told me the offer would stand for as long as he was running things. The email I sent him from my desk that morning said this: "Stephen, the conversation we had in August, I'm ready to talk. Are you available this week?" He called me back inside of 9 minutes. I will tell you the rest of what happened over the next 90 days, and I will try to tell it without making it sound clean, because it wasn't clean. It was the hardest stretch of my professional life. I had to do my regular job. I had to attend meetings where Cole sat at the head of the table and asked questions that would have been answered by reading the email he was responding to. I had to nod when Wade told me what a great transition this was going to be and how excited he was for the next chapter of Harlan Logistics. And I had to negotiate the most important employment contract of my life without anyone in that building finding out. Stephen and I met 3 times in those 90 days, all of them off-site. Once at a Cracker Barrel in Weatherford, once at a small barbecue place outside of Sweetwater, once in a conference room at a hotel in Oklahoma City, where I had told Wade I was attending an industry workshop. I was not attending an industry workshop. I was signing an offer letter for the position of Executive Vice President of Government Services at Mercer Lane Logistics, with a compensation package that was 43% higher than what I had been making at Harlan, a guaranteed annual bonus structure tied to revenue I'd directly generate, equity participation, and, this is the part that mattered, a contract clause specifying that my new employer would pursue, support, and bid on every federal procurement I identified as a target during my first 18 months. In plain English, Stephen knew exactly what I was bringing him, and he wrote it into the contract. I want to pause here to say something about the legal piece, because I know somebody listening to this is going to wonder. I did not steal anything. I did not take a single document out of Harlan Logistics. I did not copy a single client file. I did not violate a single confidentiality provision in my employment agreement because, and this is a thing Wade had never bothered to check, I did not have a non-compete. Texas is a state where non-competes have to be reasonable in scope, duration, and geography, and Harlan had never asked me to sign one. They had me sign an NDA in 2003, which covered trade secrets and proprietary information, and I followed that NDA to the letter. What I took with me was what was already mine: my name, my reputation, my security clearance, my CPR's history, my relationships, which had been built one phone call and one site visit and one shared cup of bad airport coffee at a time over 21 years. The federal government's procurement system is public. The names of contracting officers are public. The competition for federal contracts is open. There is no law that says I can't make a phone call. So I made phone calls. I made them at night from my home office, on my personal cell phone, on my own time. I called every contracting officer I had worked with, one by one, over the course of about 6 weeks. I did not tell them I was leaving Harlan. I did not badmouth Wade or Cole or anyone else. What I did was this. I told them that I had some changes coming in my career, and I wanted them to have my personal contact information so that we could stay in touch regardless of where I landed. I asked them how their families were. I remembered the names of their kids. I asked Patricia at Fort Bliss how her son's college applications were going, and I asked Marvin at DLA how his back was holding up after the surgery, and I asked Yvonne at GSA whether she had ever gotten her mother moved into the assisted living place she'd been looking at. Every single one of them gave me their personal number. On April 3rd, 91 days after the announcement, I walked into Wade's office at the end of the business day with a single sheet of paper and laid it on his desk. It was my letter of resignation. 2 weeks' notice, effective April 17th. Professional, brief, polite. Wade read it twice, then he looked up at me and said, "Russell, don't be like this." I said, "Wade, I'm not being like anything. I'm taking another opportunity." He asked me where. I told him. His face did this thing I will remember for the rest of my life. It started as confusion, and then it slid through realization, and then it stopped at something I can only describe as the look a man has when he's running the math in his head, and the math is not working. "You can't," he started, and then he stopped, because he had remembered, just like I had remembered 5 months earlier, that there was nothing in my contract that said I couldn't. "I'll work through my 2 weeks," I said. "I'll do everything I can to make a clean handoff. I owe the company that much." I owed the company that much. I want to be clear about that. I worked those 2 weeks. I sat down with Cole, who suddenly was very interested in spending time with me, and I walked him through every single federal contract we had. I gave him the names and numbers of every contracting officer. I gave him written memos on the status of every open bid. I did not, however, tell him what I had told those contracting officers in my private phone calls, because he didn't ask, and I was under no obligation to volunteer. On my last day, April 17th, a Thursday, I packed up my office in 2 file boxes, personal items only, a photograph of Caroline and the girls, a framed unit patch from my Army days, a coffee mug my younger daughter had made me in 3rd grade, a small bronze coin a contracting officer at the VA had given me in 2019 after we delivered medical equipment for a hurricane response in 12 hours flat. Loretta walked me out. She had been crying earlier in the week when she'd figured out what was happening. She didn't cry there the other week when she'd figured out what was happening. She didn't cry that day. She just hugged me hard at the front door and said, "Get them, Russ. Get them good." I told her that wasn't what this was about. But I will be honest with you, it was a little bit about that. I started at Mercer Lane the following Monday. They had a corner office waiting for me on the 3rd floor of their headquarters building in Fort Worth with a view of the parking lot and a phone that didn't work yet because IT hadn't finished provisioning my line. I plugged in my laptop and got to work. Over the next 60 days, 11 of Harlan's federal contracts went up for recompete, modification, or option year renewal. That's normal in federal contracting. Contracts cycle, options get exercised, recompetes happen on a schedule. Of those 11 contracts, Mercer Lane Logistics bid on 9 of them. We won 7. I want to be very precise about why we won. We did not win because of any improper conduct. We won because in 7 out of those 9 cases, the contracting officer, the person making the award decision, had worked with me personally for years and had only worked with the new team at Harlan for about 10 weeks. We won because Mercer Lane's technical proposals listed me as the program manager and key personnel, and my past performance score in CPARs was significantly higher than what the new Harlan team could demonstrate. We won because federal contracting is, at the end of the day, a relationship business, and the relationships had walked out the door with me. By the end of that first 60 days, I had moved roughly $19 million in annualized contract revenue from Harlan to Mercer Lane. By the end of the year, that number was closer to $28 million, because I'd identified additional opportunities Harlan hadn't been pursuing. I heard things in those months. I heard that Cole had started showing up at the office at 7:30 in the morning instead of 11. I heard that Wade had hired a federal contracting consultant from Dallas at $300 an hour to try to figure out what had happened. I heard that Earl, my father-in-law, who I hadn't spoken to since my resignation, had had a long conversation with Wade in the conference room one Saturday morning that ended with Wade leaving in tears. Caroline heard most of this from her sister-in-law, Wade's wife, who at first had been very cold to her, and then, around month 4, had started calling her again, sounding tired and small. I didn't gloat. I want to make that clear. I did not call Wade. I did not sound any messages through Caroline. I did not so much as drive past the Harlan building, even though I had occasion to be in Lubbock for a customer visit twice that summer. When Caroline asked me, around month 6, whether I felt vindicated, I told her the truth. I don't feel vindicated. I told her the truth. I don't feel vindicated, I said. I feel relieved. There's a difference. About 11 months after my last day at Harlan, I got a phone call from Earl. I almost didn't answer. I was sitting in the kitchen on a Saturday morning drinking coffee, and his name came up on the screen, and I looked at it for 2 full rings before I picked up. "Russell," he said. "Earl, can I come see you?" I told him yes. He drove out the next day in his big old Cadillac with the dent in the rear quarter panel he'd never bothered to fix, and he sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd written that yellow pad inventory 14 months earlier, and he looked at me with the watery, exhausted eyes of an 83-year-old man whose life's work was sliding out from under him. He didn't ask me to come back. He didn't ask me for anything specific, actually. What he said was, "I made a mistake. I let my boy do something he shouldn't have done, and I didn't stop it. I'm sorry, son." He hadn't called me son since the year my younger daughter was born. I sat with that for a long time. Then I told him the truth, which was that I forgave him for his part in it because I did, but that I wasn't coming back. Not as a consultant, not as a board member, not for any number. Because the company he had built with his own 2 hands had stopped being a company that I could trust, and trust, once you spend it, doesn't replenish. He nodded. He drank his coffee. He told me Caroline was lucky to have me. He stood up slowly the way old men do, and he walked out to his Cadillac, and he drove home. That was the last conversation I ever had with him. He passed about 14 months later. I did not go to the funeral. Caroline went. I think that was the right call for both of us. Harlan Logistics is still in business. The last I checked, it's about a third of the size it was the day I walked out. Cole is no longer the COO. He went back to shadowing, from what I understand, which I assume is corporate speak for showing up when he feels like it. Wade is still the CEO. The Federal Contracting Division was effectively dissolved about 2 years after my departure because they couldn't keep the work and they couldn't compete for new work without a key personnel candidate who had any meaningful past performance. I am 60 years old now. I'm still at Mercer Lane. I'm a senior vice president. I have a team of 46 people who report up through me, and last year my division was responsible for $61 million in federal revenue. I'll retire in 2 or 3 years probably, and the company has been very clear that they want me to stay on as a senior advisor as long as I'm willing. Caroline and I have been married 34 years this October. Our girls are grown. The older one is a nurse practitioner in Austin. The younger one teaches high school chemistry in Albuquerque and is about to have our first grandchild. We bought a small place outside Ruidoso last year in the mountains, and we go up there most weekends in the summer. I want to leave you with two things, and then I'm done. The first is this: if you are working for a family business and you are not family, understand exactly what you are. You are a tool, a useful one, a loved one even, sometimes, but a tool. And the day comes, and it always comes, when the family decides that the family matters more than the business, and you will not be on the family side of that line. Plan accordingly. Document everything. Know what is yours and what is theirs. Keep your network outside the building. The second is this: the best revenge is not loud. The best revenge does not require a single confrontation or a single raised voice. The best revenge is simply leaving with what was always yours to begin with, and letting the people who underestimated you discover, slowly and at their own pace, exactly what they had. 21 years I built that company. They thought I built it for them. I built it for me. I just hadn't realized it yet. I think about that morning in the conference room more than I should, not because it still hurts. It doesn't, not really, but because every time I turn it over in my head, I find a different lesson sitting underneath it. The first lesson is about cause and effect. Wade did not wake up one Tuesday and decide to hand my job to his son out of nowhere. He made that decision because for 21 years I had led him believe that my loyalty meant I would always be there. I had built something for him, and I had built it so quietly and so steadily that he had stopped seeing it as work and started seeing it as a kind of background hum. People stop valuing what they stop noticing. That is a law, the same as gravity. And the day Cole stood up at the front of that room was not the cause of what came next. It was the consequence of 2 decades in which Wade had been allowed to forget who was actually carrying the load. I had let him forget. That part is on me. The second lesson is about what character actually means when nobody is testing you. It is easy to be a person of integrity when life is going well. The real test is what you do in the 90 days between the announcement and the resignation. I could have stolen documents. I could have badmouthed Wade to his own contracting officers. I could have rage quit on day one and made a scene that would have felt good for about 6 hours and then haunted me for the rest of my life. I didn't, not because I'm a saint, but because I learned a long time ago that the only person who has to live inside your skin is you. Whatever you do, you carry it home. I wanted to be able to look Caroline in the face the next morning and the morning after that, so I did it clean. The third lesson is the one I want anyone listening to actually hold on to. Endurance is not the same thing as patience, and patience is not the same thing as passivity. I waited 21 years for Wade to do right by me. That wasn't strength. That was hope, dressed up in a work shirt. Real strength is knowing when waiting has stopped being a strategy and started being an excuse. Real strength is the yellow legal pad at 5 in the morning, the quiet phone calls at night, the calm signature on the resignation letter. It is doing the slow, unglamorous work of building your own exit while still showing up to a job you already know is over. I am 60 years old now. I have a granddaughter on the way. I have a wife who looked me in the eye at the worst moment of my career and said she was with me. And I have a kitchen table where I once wrote a list that changed my life, not because the list was clever, but because I finally let myself believe I was worth more than the chair I was sitting in. That is the only revenge that ever actually mattered.